Why It Sucks to Be Born as an American, Part 4. Debt Burden. There is a clock in New York City. It has been running since 1989. It doesn't tell you the time. It tells you something else entirely. As of this filming, $36 trillion, $107,000 for every person in this country. No one looks at it anymore, which is perhaps the whole problem. The post-war decades were a golden age of American fiscal ambition. The government built highways, funded research, educated veterans, and it borrowed to do it. But the economy grew fast enough that the debt shrank as a share of national output. Vietnam changed the arithmetic. Guns and butter war spending plus social programs and no tax increase to pay for either. In 1971, President Nixon severed the dollar's link to gold. Money could now be created without physical constraint. The age of pure fiat currency began. Inflation surged through the 1970s. Interest rates hit 20%. The economy buckled. The debt kept climbing. The 1980s introduced a new philosophy: cut taxes, increase spending, and assume growth would fill the gap. It did not fill the gap. The late 1990s produced the last sustained budget surpluses in American history. Briefly, the debt appeared manageable. Then September came. 2 wars, financed entirely on credit, and simultaneously another round of major tax cuts. The surplus evaporated within months. The government did what governments do in crisis. It spent. TARP, stimulus, bank bailouts. Necessary, many argued, but borrowed. Recovery was slow. The debt was not. COVID-19 arrived, and the government spent as it had never spent before in a matter of months, trillions in relief, loans, and stimulus. Some of it saved lives. Some of it saved businesses. All of it was borrowed, and the interest clock never stopped. Interest. The word sounds administrative, bloodless, like something that happens in spreadsheets. In 2024, the United States paid more than $1 trillion in interest on its debt, not principal, interest alone. Every dollar paid in interest is a dollar not spent on roads, on research, on schools, on the future. Who holds that debt? American citizens, pension funds, foreign governments. China holds about $800 billion of it. Japan holds more. This is not inherently sinister. Governments borrow. It is how they function. But scale changes everything. The clock adds roughly $40,000 of new debt every single second. Not because spending is out of control in any one place, but because the interest compounds and the borrowing never stops. This is not a story about numbers. Numbers are just the record. This is a story about what the numbers mean in a grocery store, in a hospital waiting room, in a classroom that hasn't been renovated since 1987. There is a tax nobody voted for. It appears on no ballot. It is collected by no agency. It is called inflation. Inflation is not caused solely by government debt, but debt contributes to it when governments borrow and spend. They add money into the economy. More money chasing the same goods. Wages went up too for many workers, but not as fast. The gap between what you earn and what things cost, that gap, is where the invisible tax lives. Purchasing power. The technical term for what your dollar can actually buy. In 1970, a dollar bought a dollar's worth. Today, it buys about 14 cents of that same value. The government still prints it as a dollar. Your paycheck still calls it a dollar. But it is not the same thing it was. No drama in this moment. Just the arithmetic of constrained choice, repeated 100 times a week by hundreds of millions of people. To fight inflation, the Federal Reserve raises interest rates. This makes borrowing more expensive for the government and for everyone else. The American dream of homeownership has not disappeared. It has simply become mathematically unreachable for a growing portion of the population. First-time homebuyers, as a share of the market, are near historic lows. Not because people don't want homes, because the monthly payment, at current rates and prices, consumes too much of a paycheck. So people rent. And rent has risen too because housing supply hasn't kept pace with demand and because the cost of building new housing has been inflated by the same forces driving everything else. When more of the paycheck goes to rent, less goes to savings. Less goes to retirement. Less goes to the unexpected. The national debt is, at its core, the government doing what many Americans have also been forced to do: put it on the card. Consumer credit card debt crossed $1 trillion for the first time in 2023. Average interest rate on that debt, over 20%. A household carrying $10,000 in credit card debt at 20% interest pays $2,000 a year just in interest charges. This is the kitchen table version of the federal interest payment problem. The government borrows. That borrowing contributes to inflation. Inflation raises the cost of living. To cover rising costs, households borrow. That borrowing creates its own interest burden. The spiral is self-reinforcing. When a government spends more than $1 trillion on interest, it faces a choice: cut something, or borrow more to cover what was cut. No single sector illustrates the debt and cost spiral more clearly than American healthcare. The U.S. spends more on healthcare than any country on earth by a wide margin and produces outcomes that rank among the lowest in the developed world. Medicaid and Medicare consume a growing share of the federal budget. They are promises made to the elderly, to the poor, that the government must keep. And as the population ages, those promises grow more expensive. The government cannot easily cut these programs. The political and human cost is too high, but it cannot fully fund them either, not without borrowing. So it borrows, and the debt grows. This is not a rare behavior. Studies suggest that nearly 1 in 4 Americans has rationed prescription medication because of cost, not in a developing nation. Here, community health centers fill gaps that the market and the government both leave. They are funded partly by federal grants. Those grants are negotiated every budget cycle, and every budget cycle is another debate about debt and deficit. Emergency rooms have become primary care for millions of Americans who lack insurance or a regular doctor. ER care costs 10 to 20 times more than a clinic visit. The inefficiency is staggering. The debt absorbs it. The patient does too. Medical debt is the leading cause of personal bankruptcy in the United States. People working full-time jobs with insurance can still be financially destroyed by a single serious illness. This is the texture of the system. Every American born today inherits approximately $107,000 in national debt. They did not sign for it. They were not consulted. The obligation is invisible. It appears in no paperwork, but it shapes the world the child will grow into, the quality of the school, the condition of the road, the stability of the currency in their first paycheck. What kind of future? The answer depends heavily on choices that will be made or avoided in the years ahead. But the baseline is already set. The Federal Student Loan Program is the government's largest direct consumer lending operation. It exists because college became expensive faster than most families could afford. Tuition has risen 8 times faster than wages over the past 4 decades. The math of working your way through college, once a common American story, has become fiction for most students. 44 million Americans carry student loan debt. For many, the loan is a first mortgage on a credential, not a house that shapes every financial decision for the next 20 years. The diploma opens doors. The debt closes others. The car purchase delayed. The apartment lease stretched. The retirement account that doesn't exist yet because the loan payment comes first. The government lent the money. The government collects the repayment. And the interest on those loans has itself become a profit center. Federal student loans generated billions in revenue for the Treasury in certain years, even as borrowers struggled. Between 1948 and 1979, productivity and wages grew together. Workers became more productive. They were paid more. The link was tight. After 1979, the link broke. Productivity continued to grow. Wages did not keep pace. The surplus created by more productive workers went somewhere to corporate profits, to shareholders, to the top of the income distribution. This gap did not cause the national debt, but it is deeply connected to it. When wages fail to grow with the economy, tax revenues grow more slowly too, and the pressure to fund social programs to compensate for stagnant wages grows. Poverty is expensive. The poor pay more for credit, more for insurance, more for housing relative to income, more for food because they cannot afford to buy in bulk. The debt spiral that characterizes the national government has its mirror in millions of household budgets. The connection between economic distress and human despair is not theoretical. It is documented in death certificates and obituaries, and the silences in families who don't talk about what happened. This is the America that the debt statistics don't capture. The toll is real. It is diffuse. It is in the room at 3 in the morning when the bills are due and the account is short. There is no macroeconomic statistic for 3 in the morning, but 3 in the morning is where policy lives. The American economy remains the largest in the world. American productivity, American innovation, American enterprise, these are real and remarkable. The debt does not negate them. But size and strength are not the same as health. A nation can be enormously productive and simultaneously structured in ways that distribute the benefits of that productivity very narrowly and distribute the costs of its obligations very broadly. The distance between the skyline and the bus shelter is not merely geographic. It is the accumulated distance of policy decisions about taxation, about wages, about what the government owes its citizens, and what it is willing to borrow to pay for. What is required is not a single solution. It is a sustained willingness to look clearly at what has been built and what it costs, and to make choices in full view of that clarity. The weight of debt-driven disinvestment falls unevenly. Rural America communities built around agriculture, manufacturing, or resource extraction has absorbed a disproportionate share of what has been left undone. A rural hospital closing is not an abstraction. It means a heart attack patient in a 40-minute ambulance ride to the nearest ER. It means a pregnant woman driving an hour to prenatal care. It means a community that has lost its anchor. A teenager in a parking lot doing homework has become a symbol of the digital divide. It is also a symbol of something larger, a country that has borrowed against its future and invested too little in the connective tissue that makes that future accessible to everyone. The country that spends more on defense than the next 10 nations combined has a VA system with chronic staffing shortages, appointment backlogs, and a suicide crisis among veterans that has persisted for decades. Every budget is a statement of values. What gets funded is what is valued. What gets deferred is not less real. It simply accumulates in waiting rooms, in crumbling roads, in the 3-digit savings account of a factory worker working the night shift. The national debt is not a mystery. Its causes are documented. Its consequences are measurable. The solutions, none easy. All requiring sacrifice, are known. The problem is political will. The debt limit, the self-imposed ceiling on government borrowing, has been raised over 100 times since 1944. It has never once actually limited the debt. It has only produced periodic theatrical crises that rattle markets and exhaust the public. Both parties have contributed to the debt. Both parties have used the debt as a political weapon against the other. Neither has successfully reduced it in a sustained way. This is not a partisan document. The debt is not owned by one ideology. It was built brick by the collective choices of a democratic society that wanted services it was not willing to fully pay for. 200% of GDP. The number is not a prediction. It is a warning. It is what happens if nothing changes. And changing something, anything significant, requires the political will that has so far been absent. The United States has one protection that no other country in the world possesses. The dollar is the world's reserve currency. When crisis hits, the world buys dollars. This privilege allows the U.S. to borrow more cheaply than anyone else. This privilege is not permanent. It is sustained by confidence in American institutions, in American economic stability, in the rule of law. It has been tested before. It will be tested again. If that confidence erodes, if the world gradually diversifies away from the dollar as countries like China, Russia, and others actively seek alternatives, the borrowing advantage disappears. American interest rates rise. The cost of servicing the debt becomes severe. This is not an argument for panic. The dollar's reserve status will not evaporate overnight. But it is an argument for urgency, because the privilege that has allowed the problem to be deferred cannot be assumed to endure forever. Meaningful debt reduction requires some combination of higher revenues, slower growth in entitlement spending, reduced defense spending, and economic growth policies that broaden the tax base. $3 to $4 trillion in adjustments over 10 years. That is the scale. It would mean real changes to real programs, real increases to real tax bills, real reductions in real services. Who bears the cost of adjustment depends entirely on political choices. Adjustments can be made equitably or inequitably. The burden can fall on those most able to absorb it or on those least able to resist it. History offers evidence on what tends to happen when governments must reduce debt under fiscal pressure. The people who have the least political power typically pay the most. Every debt is a claim on the future. Every dollar borrowed today is a dollar someone, somewhere, must eventually earn or forego. The question is not whether that reckoning comes. The question is who it comes for, and whether the people who had no voice in the borrowing will be the ones left holding the bill. If you enjoyed this video, subscribe to stay informed, like to amplify the message, and turn on notifications.